I might be a bit biased, but sexology research is probably some of the coolest and most fun research within the realm of psychology. In your Intro to Psych course, you likely learned about some of the basic forms of research that psychologists use. Sexology research also uses those methods. Since you likely have a little bit of background regarding the methods I've included on this slide, I'm not going to give you a major overview. Instead, we'll talk more about how these methods are used in sexology research. Each of these methods has strengths and weaknesses, and no single study will be able to prove something about human sexuality. However, when we take multiple studies that have similar findings, then these findings become more robust. So keep in mind that no single study or method is perfect. So the first three methods, survey, direct observation, and case reports, are non-experimental methods. They describe people's thoughts, feelings, and behavior. Most human sexuality research comes from the use of surveys. So we simply ask people to report on their sexual attitudes and practices. Probably the best part about surveys is that you can get a lot of data from them quickly, and you can administer them to a large number of people. They're also pretty cost-effective. However, there are some limitations like self-selection bias and social desirability bias. We could also run into problems where the survey might be lacking in quality of questions. For example, word choices or the questions we choose to ask, how we choose to ask them, and if the questions are leading questions, etc., can all influence how people respond to the survey. The sexologists sometimes use direct observation, which is when researchers directly observe a phenomenon. For many reasons, such as participant discomfort, this method isn't commonly used in sexology research. With direct observation, we're able to reduce biased responses from participants, and researchers can revisit observations if they're filmed or they're recorded. The downfalls are that, once again, self-selection is a concern. Participants also might be reactive, meaning that they alter their behavior when they know someone is watching them. The last non-experimental method is case reports. So this is when we study one participant or a small group in great detail. The subject is usually unique in some way. For example, they may be a sex worker or have an unusual paraphilia. One benefit of case reports is that they provide a ton of information about an unusual subject, which can be very valuable. However, they're hard to generalize to larger groups of people, and they rely a lot on subjective reports of the participants' past. Experiments help us understand cause and effect. With experiments, we can control variables precisely, which allows us to make claims about causality. However, with sexology research, sometimes the questions we have can't easily be studied through experiments. And we also might encounter external validity problems. I've already touched on a few of these topics, but wanted to go over them a little more in depth. So when conducting sexology research, researchers have to be very mindful of the sample they select. A lot of the times, researchers will use convenience sampling. So this is when our sample consists of participants who are easy to access. So if you're familiar with the SONA system at ISU, this is a method of recruitment that researchers use that typically involves convenience sampling. As a researcher at ISU, we have access to a lot of college students who are required to participate in research for course credit. So this helps us collect our data fairly quickly. However, the downside here is that we may not be able to generalize that data. So especially regarding sexology research, the experiences of college students may not represent the experience of other ages or groups. Another issue that we touched on is self-selection. So just to recap, self-selection can cause our data to be biased. So people who participate in sexology research, they may have more sexual experience and be open to talking about those experiences compared to the general public. In particular, social desirability is something that we have to watch out for when we're using surveys. So some of the topics that are covered in sexology research can be sensitive or embarrassing to talk about. So to help mitigate this issue, a researcher may include a social desirability scale at the beginning of the survey. So this scale might include questions like, have you ever littered? Most people have littered at some point in their lives, but it isn't something they want to admit. So if somebody responds no, and they respond like that to almost all of the questions about social desirability, then we know that they may not be very truthful in their responses, and we may want to exclude their data. In an experiment or observational research, a researcher may do something such as use a bogus pipeline. So this could be doing something like attaching a device to a participant with electrodes and letting them know that it's a device that detects lying. So, of course, the device may not actually be detecting lying, but if the participant believes it does, then they'll be more likely to be truthful in their responses. Sexology, like many areas of psychology, has previously been involved in unethical studies. For example, the Tuskegee syphilis study. So today, there are several principles that sexologists must uphold, one of which is consent. So before a participant begins a study, they have to provide their informed consent. They need to be told the nature of the study, their rights, and the risks and rewards that come with participating. Although the researcher can't withhold significant information about the study, they can withhold certain information if a committee review board believes that the deception is acceptable, appropriate, and necessary. For example, a researcher may say that they're studying one phenomenon when they're actually looking at a slightly different one. During debriefing, a researcher has the responsibility of telling the participant the true purpose of the study and to be informed of any deception. So the last principle that we'll talk about is confidentiality. The privacy of participants has to be protected. In sexology research, we often collect deeply personal information that could potentially damage lives if that information got out. Additionally, if participants aren't assured that their information will remain confidential, they'll be less likely to respond honestly and accurately. However, confidentiality may need to be broken when it's required by law, such as if a participant discloses abuse regarding children or the elderly.